If history really moved in a straight line, this story wouldn't exist, because nothing about it makes sense if progress only goes forward. Imagine walking through the ruins of an ancient city. Not just broken stones and collapsed walls, but precision, perfect angles, systems that feel engineered, not improvised. You're told this place is 4,000 years old. You're told the people here lived simple lives, powered by muscle, superstition, and luck. But what you're seeing doesn't match the story you were taught. Now imagine this isn't just one city. Imagine the same impossible fingerprints showing up across the world. In Asia, in Europe, in the Middle East, in the Americas. Identical technologies, identical standards, identical solutions to complex problems, appearing, then vanishing. That's where Babylon enters the story. Not as a myth, not as a fairy tale, but as a problem. Because the deeper archaeologists dug beneath Babylon, the less ancient it began to look. Let's start with something simple: electricity. In 1936, a clay vessel was found near Baghdad. Inside it was a copper cylinder, an iron rod, and traces of acidic residue. When liquid, like vinegar, is added, the object produces a steady electric current, around 1 volt. Stable, predictable, repeatable. This object is now known as the Baghdad battery. Officially, you're told it was probably used for primitive electroplating. Ancient artisans, we're told, accidentally discovered how to coat metals with gold. It sounds reasonable, until you stop and do the math. Electroplating doesn't work with one battery. It requires a circuit, voltage, consistency. To plate even a medium-sized object, you'd need dozens of these units connected together. For statues, columns, architectural elements inside royal palaces, you'd need thousands, tens of thousands. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Where are the workshops? Because these batteries weren't found in artisan studios. They weren't found next to jewelry tools. They were discovered embedded in walls, buried under floors, integrated into foundations, in places no craftsman would ever install a temporary tool. Almost as if they weren't tools at all. Almost as if they were infrastructure. Power sources placed directly into the architecture itself. And that leads to an even more disturbing question. If this was a power system, what was it powering? To understand that, you have to look beneath the streets. Babylon's underground reveals a sewer system that shouldn't exist. Not open ditches, not crude channels, but sealed, pressurized clay pipes, precisely fitted, carefully angled, designed to handle flow, pressure, and volume. The joints are sealed with resin and bitumen so well that modern plumbers have admitted they'd be proud of the workmanship. This system could serve hundreds of thousands of people. And it did. Textbooks will tell you that advanced sewage systems were a Roman invention, that pressurized underground drainage only truly emerged in the 19th century when industrial materials, pumps, and hydraulic science made it possible. That before that, cities were filthy, disease-ridden, and chaotic. Babylon disagrees. Because these pipes aren't experimental. They aren't one-off solutions. They follow standards, consistent diameters, calculated slopes, even signs of forced pumping in certain sections suggesting mechanical assistance. That means someone understood hydraulics, not just intuitively, mathematically. But here's the problem. Knowledge like that doesn't disappear. If one civilization learns how to calculate pressure, flow rate, and gradient, that knowledge gets passed down through apprentices, through manuals, through tradition. Guilds don't forget how to do their jobs for 2,000 years and then suddenly remember again, unless something breaks the chain. And Babylon isn't an exception, it's a pattern. Among the ruins, archaeologists found glass lenses, thick, clear, uniform, perfectly shaped. When placed over text, they magnify it cleanly. No distortion, no bubbles, no cloudiness. These are optical devices. But ancient glass, as we're taught, was crude, uneven, filled with imperfections. suitable for beads and ornaments, not precision optics. Creating a lens like this requires temperature control, controlled cooling, and a deep understanding of refraction. Even more troubling, every lens found has the same curvature, the same focal length. That means standardization, factory-level accuracy. And it doesn't stop there. Metal tools found beneath palaces show machining marks, parallel grooves, uniform cuts, evidence of rotation at constant speed. These marks cannot be produced by hand. Copper chisels don't leave lines like that. Hammers don't create consistent depth across stone. This is mechanical processing, using hardened metal, which leads us to stainless steel. Official history says stainless steel was invented in 1913. Before that, iron rusted, steel corroded. No one could reliably prevent oxidation. And yet, tools found in Babylon haven't rusted after thousands of years underground. Analysis shows alloy compositions that require precise chromium content, controlled furnaces, high temperatures, metallurgical knowledge that supposedly didn't exist. Chromium itself wasn't even identified until the late 18th century. So how was it used in ancient alloys? Either Babylon had technology centuries ahead of its time, or the dating is wrong. And this isn't limited to Babylon. In India, there's a massive iron pillar that hasn't rusted in over 1,000 years. In South America, alloys appear that don't exist naturally. In multiple regions, metals show the same engineered properties, as if produced by a shared system, a global one. Now, consider sound. Deep underground rooms have been found with impossible acoustics. Clay vessels embedded in walls, arranged at specific heights and angles, tuned to amplify human speech. Stand in the right spot, and even a whisper becomes loud and clear. Move a few feet, and the effect disappears. These are Helmholtz resonators, a concept officially described in the 19th century. But these rooms predate that by millennia. They aren't experiments. They're standardized designs found in multiple buildings built from the same blueprint, which suggests they weren't ceremonial. They were functional, communication without wires. And then there's light. Underground halls with no windows, no soot, no burn marks, no residue from torches or oil lamps. Stone ceilings remain clean, pale, untouched. If fire had been used regularly, the evidence would be impossible to erase. But instead, archaeologists found bronze mirrors, polished, adjustable, positioned to bounce sunlight deep into corridors, a light guiding system using reflection and geometry. No smoke, no flame, just optics. Knowledge that officially belongs to the Renaissance, and yet it was used routinely. Even homes were engineered beyond expectation. Double-layered floors, underfloor heating systems that circulated warm air evenly, smoke diverted outside, precise airflow control, comfort without contamination. The Romans are credited with inventing this, but after Rome fell, the technology vanished. For over 1,000 years, people froze in stone castles while standing on top of forgotten solutions, and no one asked why. All of this raises one unavoidable question. If these technologies existed, why did they disappear? Not gradually, not partially, but almost completely. Batteries vanish, then reappear in the 1800s. Precision optics vanish, then reappear in medieval Europe. Stainless steel disappears, then returns in the 20th century. Acoustic engineering vanishes, then reemerges during the industrial age. That's not how progress works. That's how resets work. And perhaps the most disturbing artifact of all is a small bronze plate found beneath a temple. A map. Not symbolic, not decorative. Accurate. Scale preserved down to millimeters. Straight lines, correct angles. Proportions that match the actual city layout with shocking precision. To create this, You need surveying instruments, triangulation, measurement theory. Officially, accurate cartography didn't exist until the 16th century. So how does a map from Babylon outperform European maps from 2,000 years later? It shouldn't be possible, unless the timeline is wrong. And once you consider that possibility, everything changes. Because buried beneath Babylon isn't just an ancient city. It's a city that looks disturbingly modern. And if Babylon wasn't alone, then what else have we been walking on top of? This is only the beginning. Because in Part 2, we're going to follow this trail beyond Babylon and uncover evidence of a global system that once covered the entire planet. If you think history is just a story of slow progress, stay with me, because the next layer changes everything. If Babylon was the anomaly, history could explain it away. A fluke, a misunderstood culture, an isolated genius that somehow burned bright and vanished. But Babylon wasn't isolated. That's where the story stops being uncomfortable and starts becoming dangerous. Because once you step outside Mesopotamia, the same fingerprints appear again and again and again, in places that had no contact, no shared language, no reason to copy each other, unless they were never separate to begin with. Let's talk about precision. In multiple regions across the world, archaeologists have found metal alloys that do not exist in nature. Not ores, not accidental mixtures, but carefully measured combinations of elements in exact proportions, ratios that repeat across continents. In Peru, alloys contain elements that require refining before mixing. In India, iron structures resist corrosion in climates that should destroy them. In China, underground acoustic chambers mirror the same designs found thousands of miles away. Identical solutions to identical engineering problems. That is not cultural coincidence. That is standardization. And standardization only exists when there is coordination. Consider manufacturing. True manufacturing, not craftsmanship. To produce identical components, you need molds, templates, quality control, someone checking tolerances, someone rejecting flawed pieces, someone documenting specifications. You need an industrial mindset, and that mindset leaves traces. One of the most overlooked discoveries comes from storage facilities, warehouses filled with ceramic vessels, hundreds of them, sometimes thousands, all identical in shape, thickness, glaze, and sealing method. Inside, organic materials preserved far beyond their natural lifespan, oils that didn't spoil, contents untouched by bacteria or mold. This isn't luck. Preserving organic material for centuries requires controlled environments, either vacuum sealing, antimicrobial materials, or chemical knowledge advanced enough to suppress decay. And these vessels weren't handmade one by one, they were mass-produced. Batch numbers, markings, consistent results. This is supply chain thinking. Which brings us to automation. In ancient irrigation systems, engineers discovered self-regulating water gates, simple in appearance, devastating in implication. Floats made of cork, counterweights, levers, balanced so that when water levels rose, gates opened automatically. When levels fell, they closed. No human input, but systems like this only work if calculations are correct. Buoyancy, torque, flow rate. A minor miscalculation and the gate fails. Yet these systems worked repeatedly in different regions, built to the same design. And cork doesn't grow everywhere. It grows in specific climates, which means materials were transported over long distances, at scale. This is not a society of isolated farmers. This is logistics. Now let's talk about writing. Among the artifacts found in Babylon are metal nibs with internal ink reservoirs, capillary-fed writing tools that allow continuous writing without dipping, modern fountain pens, officially invented in the 19th century, yet here they are. Writing instruments like this don't appear unless there is heavy documentation, bureaucracy, administration, engineers writing specifications, planners drawing layouts, officials recording inventory. Simple societies don't need this. Complex systems do. And that complexity shows up again in maps. Not just Babylon's map, but many others like it. Maps with consistent scale, accurate proportions, correct orientation, streets aligning perfectly with excavated ruins. These aren't artistic impressions, they are technical documents. To create them, you need surveying instruments, angle measurement, distance calculation, triangulation. Official history says this knowledge emerged in early modern Europe, but the evidence says it existed long before, which brings us to a name that history prefers to keep vague: Tartaria. If you open European maps from the 17th and 18th centuries, you'll see it clearly labeled, stretching across vast portions of Asia, sometimes described as Great Tartary, sometimes Independent Tartary. Not a myth, not a mistake. These maps were drawn by different cartographers from different countries with different political interests, yet the borders appear again and again. You don't accidentally invent the same empire multiple times. And then, suddenly, it's gone. Between the mid-18th and mid-19th century, Tartaria disappears from maps. Not gradually, not as a shrinking territory, but erased. No major war records, no detailed conquest narratives, no decisive battles taught in schools, no collapse stories like Rome. Just silence. Which is strange, because empires don't vanish quietly. Even defeated ones leave scars, ruins, records, refugees, cultural memory. Unless something else happened. Now look at the cities themselves. In Babylon, buildings are buried several meters below current ground level. First floors underground, windows turned into basements, entrances sealed by soil. The same pattern appears in St. Petersburg, Moscow, Berlin, Paris, even parts of New York. Entire cities partially submerged in mud. Not from slow accumulation, but from sudden deposition. Mud doesn't gently cover cities evenly. Floods don't bury first floors cleanly across continents, but mud flows do. Fast, heavy, massive. Events capable of resetting civilization. Photographs from the 19th century show people standing beside massive stone buildings already complete, not constructing them, excavating them, digging them out, claiming them. And suddenly, history accelerates. Technologies invented one after another: batteries, precision optics, modern metallurgy, plumbing, heating, urban planning. As if rediscovered. As if someone found a manual and started copying. But here's the part that changes everything. Many 18th century texts don't describe these technologies as new. They describe them as existing systems, being repaired, being adapted, being standardized. Not invented. Inherited. And that brings us back to the uncomfortable truth. Knowledge doesn't vanish naturally. People forget recipes. They don't forget physics. A lens always bends light. Sound always resonates. Metal always oxidizes according to the same laws. Anyone who observes these phenomena can rediscover them, unless observation itself is interrupted. Unless the people who understood these systems disappeared, and their replacements didn't understand what they inherited. Imagine arriving in a city after a catastrophe. Buildings intact, systems buried, infrastructure damaged but recoverable. You don't understand how it works, so you simplify, you repurpose, you rename, you claim authorship, and eventually you rewrite the story. Because admitting that the past was more advanced than you is dangerous. It undermines authority, it raises questions, and questions lead to instability. So, the timeline stretches. Thousands of years inserted where there may have been hundreds. Ancient civilizations pushed back into myth, a linear story of progress constructed. Stone Age to Bronze Age to Iron Age to Enlightenment. Clean, predictable, comforting, but false. And if this global civilization existed, if Babylon was part of it, if Tartaria was its final political expression, then we are not the peak of history. We are the aftermath. And that leads to the most terrifying question of all. What destroyed it? Because civilizations don't reset themselves. In Part 3, we're going to confront that question head-on. And once you see the evidence, you may never look at history the same way again. At some point, the evidence stops asking questions. It starts demanding answers. If a global civilization once existed, with standardized technology, shared infrastructure, and coordinated engineering across continents, then its disappearance is not a mystery, it's an event. And events of that scale leave scars, they leave patterns, they leave survivors who don't fully understand what they inherit. Let's start with the silence. Where are the texts? Where are the manuals, the blueprints, the formulas? Where are the detailed explanations of batteries, alloys, acoustics, optics, hydraulics? They should exist. Complex systems require documentation. Engineers don't work from memory alone. Knowledge is written down, copied, stored. And yet, those documents are missing. Not damaged, not incomplete, missing, as if they were deliberately removed or destroyed. Now consider dating. Most of what we know about ancient timelines is based on relative dating, style, artistic motifs, assumptions. Someone decides that a certain ornament looks old and assigns it to an era that already exists in the textbook. Radiocarbon dating doesn't help much here. It only works on organic material. It has wide error margins, and it cannot date stone, metal, or ceramics directly. So when a city is labeled 2,000 years old, what's really being dated? Often, it's the story, not the object. Now think about this. If you found a smartphone buried underground and dated the surrounding soil to 2000 BCE, would that make the phone ancient? Or would it mean your dating method is flawed? That's the problem. The timeline assumes progress, so anything advanced must be recent. Anything buried must be ancient. But what if burial has nothing to do with age? What if it has to do with catastrophe? Across the world, we see the same strange phenomenon. Cities partially buried, uniform layers of mud, buildings intact but submerged, first floors underground, streets raised above original levels. This is not normal urban development. This is not gradual sediment. This is rapid deposition, a mud flow event. And not a local one, a planetary one. The early 19th century becomes very interesting when you look closely. This is when Tartaria disappears from maps. This is when massive reconstruction projects appear across Europe and America. This is when photography emerges, conveniently capturing people excavating cities, not building them. This is when technologies supposedly leap forward at an impossible pace, as if civilization didn't invent them, but reactivated them. And the people doing this weren't savages. They were organized. They had presses, universities, armies, bureaucracies. They had the power to define truth. Imagine inheriting a world you don't understand. Cities built by others, systems buried beneath your feet, machines you can't fully operate, materials you can't reproduce. You have two choices. Admit you are standing on the ruins of giants, or rewrite history so you become the giants. You simplify explanations, you rename technologies, you reclassify infrastructure as ritual. A battery becomes a religious artifact, an acoustic network becomes a ceremonial hall, optical devices become curiosities, maps become symbolic art, and anything that doesn't fit gets locked away. Museum storage rooms are full of artifacts the public never sees, objects that don't match the official timeline, items labeled incorrectly or not labeled at all. Researchers who ask the wrong questions face delays, denials, disappearances from archives. Maps are cropped, borders erased, names forgotten. And over time, the rewritten story becomes reality. Children learn it in school. Adults defend it emotionally. Questioning it feels like heresy. But here's the thing. The laws of physics don't care about narratives. Sound behaves the same way in every century. Light reflects at the same angle regardless of empire. Metal oxidizes according to chemistry, not politics. If something worked once, it can work again. And if it existed once, it didn't vanish by accident. Which brings us to the final question. Who benefited? Who benefits from a reset? From a population with no memory of advanced systems? From societies forced to rediscover basic infrastructure? From centralized power defining what counts as science and what counts as myth? Every reset creates opportunity. Opportunity to redraw borders, to redistribute land, to control resources, to define progress. History, as taught, is a story of constant improvement, but the evidence suggests something darker, a cycle. Rise, peak, collapse, reset, again and again. Not because humanity is incapable, but because something intervenes, sometimes nature, sometimes something else. And the most disturbing possibility is this. What if the civilization we call modern is not the first to reach this level? What if we're not building toward the future, but racing toward the same cliff? The ruins beneath Babylon are not ancient history, they are a warning. They tell us that advanced systems can exist, be buried, and forgotten. That truth can be overwritten, that progress can be reversed, and that those who control the story control reality. So the next time you hear that something is impossible for the ancient world, ask yourself one question. Impossible for who? Because if the past was more advanced than we're told, then the future is far less guaranteed than we believe. If you want to keep exploring these hidden layers of history, stay with the channel. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because this isn't about the past anymore. It's about understanding what kind of world we're actually living in and who really built it.